Welcome, everyone. This is a rather hastily scheduled Myth Salon that came out of several people suggesting to me a thought that I already had, which was in this pandemic and in the issues in Afghanistan, we just have crisis upon crisis. And one of the biggest tragedies that I saw in the news coverage of Afghanistan was how the people on all sides of this are wearing masks while they're fighting a war with each other. And everybody has this common enemy of the coronavirus. To me, there's just something wrong with being at war with one another, and everybody worried more about the coronavirus as we are here. And I see mothers with little kids wearing masks being sent home from school. I received an email this morning about Dennis Slattery's granddaughter being sent home, being diagnosed with COVID positive. The mother now has it. The father, Dennis's son, is doing his best to take care of them and stay at a distance. But I mean, people, this is really crazy. They don't have mask mandates down in Texas. We need to get a handle on this situation and start working together. And what came out was really how, as a community, if we really develop and educate ourselves into a sensibility of compassion and caring for one another, I think we can pull through this. But my gosh, I mean, what is happening to us in this day and age is just, it's unheard of. So I would like, as I do with a Myth Salon, even if it's a hairy last minute Myth Salon, to which we have really, I'm flattered that we had so much response to this at the last minute. I would like to just open up, as I do, with a touch of the singing bowl and just hold these people in your thoughts, please, and let's get through this. It seems really appropriate today to start our Myth Salon with a poem by Rumi, and it's called What Hurts the Soul. We tremble, thinking we're about to dissolve into non-existence, but non-existence fears even more than it might be given human form. Say that one again. But non-existence fears even more that it might be given human form. Loving God is the only pleasure. Other delights turn bitter. What hurts the soul? To live without tasting the water of its own essence. People focus on death and this material earth. They have doubts about soul water. These doubts can be reduced. Use the night to wake your clarity. Darkness and living water are lovers. Let them stay together. When merchants eat their big meals and sleep their dead sleep, night thieves go to work. I met Zaman Stanizai at UCLA. He was teaching an extension course on Rumi. And we fell into each other's arms. And it's been a fast and deep friendship ever since. He's being called upon by the news media to
after a European state,
provide some perspective about the situation, the crisis in Afghanistan today. Understandably, I don't know very many Afghans, but I know Zaman, and he's cultured, and he's warm, and he has so much to offer us. So I'd like to turn this over to Will, who can give us an introduction to our reduced panel, and then he'll introduce Zaman Stanizai. And let's go. Let's see what we talk about today. Will?
Thanks, Dana, and thanks for the update on what's going on with Dennis and some others in our close circles. We get together for this event, and a little bit of a last minute thing, and for not such great reasons. And while we are very grateful, Zaman, that you're joining us, I just want to start by inviting all of us here to send our hearts your direction, because I know that that this is very, this is familial and personal. You have people you care about who are in danger, people you care about who over the last 20 years have been more than in danger. We have invited you to share with this audience some of what's been going on in Afghanistan and in the Middle East at large, going back to, I believe, our second or third Myth Salon when it was in Dana's living room. And I'm not sure that there's any time more immediate than now when it comes to our need to understand what's going on in that world. And if there's anything you can share with those of us who are less aware of what's going on, I think we would all benefit greatly. And I believe that that's why most of us are here tonight, is because we know that we're hearing about these stories from the BBC and from CNN and from AOL News or wherever we're getting it from. And those of us here all would really like to hear your thoughts about it. So let me do a quick introduction to our panelists. You guys know very well by now, and then another reminder, introduction to Zaman. So Dr. Selina Matthews, a clinical psychologist, author and keynote speaker who graduated from Pacifica and has been an ever-present supporter and participant in this Myth Salon. Dr. Vorris Nunley is a professor at the University of California, Riverside, who teaches rhetoric, philosophy, and literature. He's interested in issues of heretical energy, the dark feminine, gendered and racialized knowledge, and the demise of vulnerability. His most recent presentation was a Sophia Center seminar on the monstrous women and meta-narrative, where he addressed the Adam and Eve myth in contemporary culture. Dr. Connie Zweig is retired from clinical practice. She's been initiated into the elderhood as a certified saging leader, as a co-author of Meeting the Shadow, the Hidden Power of the Dark Side of Human Nature and Romancing the Shadow, Illuminating the Dark Side of the Soul, and author of Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality. Dr. Connie has come to be known as a guide who can go where others fear to tread. So we're very lucky, Connie. I hope you have some thoughts for us today about what shadow activity might be going on in this whole equation. Zaman is a, let me actually read another bio here. I want you guys to all know that if you're interested in learning more about Zaman, we've created this portal, which you can find in the event for tonight. And in that portal, you'll find a full extended playlist of Zaman's talks around this issue and others. Zaman is a professor of mythology and political science at Pacifica and Cal State, a poet, linguist, mystic, and Fulbright scholar. He's written extensively on a wide range of topics from Indo-Iranian languages to identity politics, political philosophy, Sufi poetry, and esoteric Islamic thought. Thank you for joining us, Zaman. We're really looking forward to any insights you can share with us around what's going on at this moment, what has been going on in the last 20 years and before, and hopefully any thoughts you have about a productive future we might pursue. Thank you, Zaman. Hopefully we can contribute to the conversation in any way.
Thank you for inviting me. I wish the occasion was different than the reality is imposing upon us, but I appreciate Dana's thinking that perhaps this issue can be discussed outside of the headlines in the media, who sometimes, excuse me, sensationalize unnecessarily, and other times they are kind of known for the superficiality of coverage, because of course, time is money for them. I thought that instead of repeating what we hear from the different alphabet soup media channels, is to go through a little bit of a historical background as to why we have gotten here. And so it's in that context, I just wanted to briefly share the map of Afghanistan, the regional map of Central Asia. So for those who, I'm sure by now most everyone knows, but just so we have an idea of where we are. It's often said that Afghanistan is in the heart of Asia. I don't know if this map can, oops, sorry. Yeah, this is better. That Afghanistan is the heart of Asia or in the heart of Asia. But I think the most critical thing is that it's the extension, the western extension of the Himalaya mountains that come and kind of creates the backbone of Afghanistan. And this becomes a wall. And for any invader going south towards India, north towards Central Asia, or west or east, they have to go through there. And so Afghanistan has been a land that's been invaded many, many times throughout history, from Alexander the Great through the Achaemenids, Genghis Khan, the British Empire, the Russian Empire, the American Empire, all these empires, and it's because of that it's called the graveyard of the empires. The problem is that nobody learns the lesson. They often blame Afghans to be a warrior culture and a warlike people. The idea is they are not a warrior culture. They are not going to the land of other people. It's when other people invade their land, they have no choice but to fight them. So since history is often written by the powers that be, they often, no matter how they mess up Afghanistan, at the end, they give themselves credit and blame Afghans for basically for resisting. So Afghanistan was one of the northern tier countries. That will be the Ottoman Empire here in the west. And then we have the Qajar Persia here. And then we have the Abdali Afghans over here that extended almost to Delhi in India and Pakistan and all this area. Now with Russia and then Soviet Russia in the north and Britain and British India in the south, they kept hammering at these three empires and shrank them to the size they are right now. So of all of the Ottoman Empire, we only have modern Turkish Republic. Of the Qajar Persia, we have a kind of a shrunken version of Persia or modern day Iran. And then Afghanistan lost more because it was much closer between the two empires, British India and Russia. I think we'll keep this image in mind. And I want to now go back to, let me stop the screen. I want to present this with an argument, or sorry, with a statement by none other than Winston Churchill, who said that Americans will always do the right thing only after they have tried everything else. And that everything else has been tried in Afghanistan for more than half a century. Right after World War II, more appropriately, the European War II, Afghanistan was one of the early members of the United Nations in 1945, a co-signer of the Charter and all the rest of it. And there was a pretty good relationship between the United States and and Afghanistan. But then came the partition of India. And what that did was that the British, if you remember the map I just showed you, that the British wanted to build a wall of Muslims against the Russian influence to the south. So they hatched a plan and said, what about creating another state here and partitioning in India into Muslims and Hindus? And so they created an artificial state, which we know today as Pakistan, which was only an idea is that if we can remember the northern tier, Ottoman Turkey, Persia, Afghanistan, and then you have Pakistan right there, and Russia will have no chance of coming anywhere south to the Indian Ocean or to India. What happened in the process was that we were in the middle of the Cold War. And the Cold War meant alliances. And so at any time one particular country sided with the Soviet Union, the Americans had to find to counterbalance that by finding another party. Well, India aligned itself with the Soviet Union, so the United States had to look for a party, for a country that would balance it, and therefore its attention shifted from Afghanistan to Pakistan. The reason being that Afghanistan was an active member of the non-alliance movement of the Bandung Conference of 1955, where the third world wanted to be independent and not just play the game for the two superpowers that were emerging after the war. So because Afghanistan didn't want it to play the game, the United States went over to Pakistan, and Pakistan was willing to pretty much play any game the Americans wanted. Just remember the counterbalancing with India. And so Pakistan joined the economic pact with Iran. Pakistan joined the CENTO alliance with Americans. That was a military alliance, kind of a little NATO in the region. So in that case, the American interest shifted to Pakistan, and Afghanistan was left alone. Well, that is the first betrayal. The problem was that they made Afghanistan turn out of economic necessity as a landlocked country towards the Soviets. And the trade between Afghanistan and the Soviet Union reached such high level that almost 50% of Afghan foreign trade was with the Soviet Union. And this created that dependency. And so even though Afghanistan wanted to be independent, but it just couldn't really do it. So it had to be in the Soviet bloc. Well, one thing led to another, and Afghanistan became pretty prosperous for the kind of geography in which it exists, and for lack of many resources that it could exploit, like it wasn't oil rich like some of the Gulf countries or other Arab states, but it did pretty well. So then Afghanistan developed, the monarchy decided that, well, let's make it a reform from above, that the constitutional monarchy for which there were certain movements earlier in the 20th century, in the 1950s and 60s, the government said, let's do that. So the king sort of sacked his cousin, and again, to use a jargon of the time, brought in a commoner to become the prime minister and form a cabinet. And other reforms included a new constitution, a new parliament, new elections, and all that. Well, the result was that Afghanistan was the world's first country to have an all PhD cabinet. Afghanistan had the Muslim world's most progressive constitution, most liberal constitution. Afghanistan started on the women's liberation movement in ways that were unheard of. which is Afghanistan had 4 women senators before the United States even had 1. Parliamentary elections and things like that, abound. And then Kabul had 26 dailies, more than New York. They were not just dailies. When you talk about freedom of the press, Afghanistan had so much of that, that it was the world's only country with 3 competing communist parties. And each one had its own publications, its own, demonstrations and all that. So in terms of schools, education in Afghanistan was free for everyone. And university students on top of it got free room and board, and stipend was there for every university student, whether you came from the province or from Kabul. Now, we are talking about a very poor country with very limited budget, with those kinds of interests in the education of the people. And it got to a point where I remember there was one particular demonstration, and the protesters, who were primarily communists or communist-oriented ones. We had Leninists, we had Marxists, we had Maoists. So it was one of these factions that kind of blocked the street right in front of the prime minister's car, his limousine. And the prime minister told the driver to stop. And a young man came screaming at the prime minister, who rolled down the window. And the man said, "You traitor, what have you done for us?" And Dr. Yosef, a German educated scholar and the prime minister, he said, "I give you the right to say that to me, to my face. I give you the right to say that to me, to my face." So the 60s was called the period of it's called the period of the experimental democracy. So let me show you a small clipping of the 1960s of Afghanistan. Now, you have to look at it in comparison to the 1960s of the United States or some other countries in Africa, Asia, it doesn't matter, but we are in the 1960s. Okay, so this is the Afghanistan of the 60s. And of course, we have gone through several filters of political upheavals and all the changes, political changes, where with every change, every government, the first thing they do is they restrict the freedoms of women. So it would be almost impossible to see women in Afghanistan like this. I went to a school with desks and tables like that. Again, boys and girls, that would have been no problem. But today, I think the Taliban just announced that they would allow the girls and the boys in separate schools. Whoever made this video, the whole emphasis was just to kind of contrast how much the life of women is different now than it was then. And here we have the generation gap between the burqa and the more modernly dressed women. But again, it was nobody's business to tell anybody how to dress and how to go out and what to wear, which is would be a luxury that most Afghan women today cannot afford. I think, yeah, well, this is going a little slow because of the music part of it. This is the Kabul University where I went to school. Again, men and women studying together, just like any modern university anywhere in the world. Again, we're talking about 1960s. caps and gowns and all that. Today, that would not be possible. So again, it shows the contrast of, the rural and the urban population mingling in the city without any problem. There are more pictures. Again, for a country, a poor country that Afghanistan was in, with a lower level of, lower percentage of literacy in the country, the government did whatever they could. These are the word processors of the 60s for people who may not have seen them. Yes, we had them in Afghanistan. Again, Kabul universities, 1950s and 60s. Not very likely today. Until 2 weeks ago, there were many private universities in Afghanistan, but probably I don't know what is going to become of them. Okay, and Afghanistan was also a tourist heaven. Most American and European tourists who were headed for India, Nepal, world travelers and hippies and whatever lifestyle they had. Here are more students at the AISK school that I attended for a day as a guest, of course. Yeah, and I think the beauty of that was that no matter how much there was a kind of a clash of culture, the old and the new, the rural and the urban population, people got along pretty well. Everybody minded their own business, and people live pretty much in freedom, however you want to define it. But the point is that there were, in terms of civil liberties, in terms of a democratic system of government, as I said earlier, that they allowed for any kind of ideological tendency to be reflected in the political thought of people in Afghanistan, certainly in Kabul, probably not to the same extent in every other city. Here you see like men and women sitting side by side and all that. This today is not possible. There's more and more segregation and all that. Okay. I think we pretty much got an idea, right? So in that case, Afghanistan was at the same time living being in the 20th century, and part of it was maybe in the 15th century, maybe 16th century. So there was a gap in terms of not just a generation gap, a gap of several centuries as to how kind of isolated and remote certain parts of the country was, and then certain other parts of the country were more modern, wearing miniskirts. Not that that is necessarily a sign of progress or anything. So let me go back to the conversation we had in terms of how the United States turned. Okay, so now back in the 60s and 70s, that is the Afghanistan that we had. Now, then we had two problems. The Russians didn't want Afghanistan, a non-aligned third world country, to be so much more advanced than the Central Asian republics, because they wanted to show they wanted Afghanistan, the Central Asian republics to look much better because they wanted to prove the advantages of communism. And if there were some countries in the region that they could blame on, Western imperialist, plans and projects, that could have been there, but they couldn't use that for Afghanistan. So what they went through was a number of a swinging of the pendulum, that anytime Afghanistan had progressed enough, there would be some kind of intervention by the Russians that would move the government a little bit back to the left. I'm talking about the political left and right. And so the last time that was during this period of experimental democracy, sure enough, there was a coup. And the coup brought the former prime minister, perhaps as a figurehead, perhaps as a real leader, but somehow, or maybe he just joined, that the communists were planning a coup, and he probably figured out that it would be okay to join them rather than to be opposing them. So that thinking that he could probably manipulate them, control them, and he did to some extent. So that was 1973, when the monarchy was overthrown, and King Zahir Shah by then was the world's longest reigning king, I think more than 40 years or something like that. Now, so Afghanistan now swung back to the left after all that I talked about. The first republic under President Dawood lasted from 73 to 78. And in 1978, the Russians became a little braver, if that's a word, and they had a coup against the president, who they thought was, oh, just because he's probably not a member of the Communist Party. But the real thing was that when Dawood took over and when he realized what the Russians were up to, he approached the West. And the United States said, okay, we will help you. We will invest in Afghanistan. But if you can sort of either cut your ties with the Russians or at least cool it off a little bit on that side. So sure enough, he said, no problem. So Iran promised to extend the border, a road to the Persian Gulf, so Afghan imports will be brought from there. The government of Libya promised to make investments. Several of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and those, and the Russians saw that there was American hand behind these movements. And sure enough, when he returned from his trip, I think it was to one of these Middle Eastern countries, when he returned from his trip in April of 1978, within a week, he was overthrown. So this time the Communist Party took over in the name of the Communist Party. And that party was in power until there was some rift and problem with the different factions and different individuals, personalities, and the government was kind of not stable enough. So then there was a coup within the Communist Party, and we had what is considered more of a Marshal Tito. He was not a military officer. He was a Western educated professor, Amin, who took over because he said, I'm going to say yes to socialism, but I'm going to say no to the Russians. And of course, when that became clear, the Russians tried to overthrow him. And he was summoned to the palace as a prime minister. He was summoned to the palace to be reprimanded or caught or red-handed or do something to him. And he was smart enough to be proactive and be ready. So he killed the person who was supposed to be killing him in front of the Soviet ambassador And they also say that he slapped the Soviet ambassador and said, "You are out." And he took over the power and sent the Soviet ambassador to Moscow within a week. And of course, the Russians sent another ambassador, but they were not going to sit quiet. So within 3 months, in December of 79, the Russian forces came in. They installed another government that was, more, without a doubt, a Russian puppet. So we went through all that period. And then, of course, the Americans remembered, oh, yeah, I think there was a time we were supposed to be supporting this country. But now that the Russians are, it's the best opportunity that we send in, support the freedom fighters, the Mujahideen. But here's the problem. The Russians came in 1979. The Americans gave up on any support because they didn't really have much hope for as they would put it, these ragtag Afghans to even put up a resistance. But they put such a resistance that the Russians had a hard time controlling the country. They went through carpet bombing and all kinds of things. And it took the Americans 6 years to give the Afghans the right kind of weapons so they could fight the Russians in 1986. So Afghanistan was invaded in 79. The only thing they did was to convince Anwar Sadat of Egypt to disarm one of the regiments where they had some old, weapons, guns and munition, whatever, that was given to Pakistan, who took their pick first, and whatever was left, they gave that to the Afghan freedom fighters. So they were basically fighting bare feet and with hungry stomachs and whatever weapons they could find. Like I said, in 1986, they gave them the Stinger missiles, through which they were able to shoot down a lot of Russian planes, and they increased the cost of war for the Russians. And then the Russians were finally, they figured it out that they couldn't control the country. Now, we move from then to a point where I believe that Russia lost a lot of credibility in the world. It was now seen as an invading country. It was seen as an occupier. It was seen as an oppressor of a poor third world country in its neighborhood and all that. And so I think these things, one led to another, that resulted in the fall of the Soviet Union, 1989, 90 and all that. But here was the thing, that the American policy was that they were going to fight the Russians to the last Afghan. The Americans were interested in lingering the war for as long as they could, because the longer that war was fought, the worse it was for the Soviet Union. So their objective was not necessarily humanitarian. It was not necessarily to help Afghans to free themselves. And that's why the delay in the shipment of effective weapons and all that. When it came to a point that the Russians were ready with Gorbachev's perestroika and glasnost, when they were ready to leave, here comes the time for the second betrayal of the Americans. Shevardnadze, the foreign minister of Soviet Union, and James Baker met in Lake Baikal in Central Asia. And what is often referred to as a gentleman's agreement, not that I was listening in, but it probably amounted to something like this, that the Russians were ready to leave Afghanistan, provided that the Afghan freedom fighters who had inspired all of Central Asia would not cross over to the Central Asian republics. So two things happened. The Russians armed the minorities in Afghanistan to turn the invasion into a civil war. The Americans encouraged the Afghans to attack one of the most fortified airports, the Jalalabad airport. And the Afghan freedom fighters said, "We are not going to do that." And the Pakistani ambassador said, "Well, that's what the boss says. We need you to go to Afghanistan, attack the Jalalabad airport, so you will have a foothold in Afghanistan, then we will recognize you politically." But the game was, this is not what the real game was. So the Afghan freedom fighters went and attacked this airport that had 3 security minefields around it. And in one night, more than 1,800 of them died. And this defeat was the first defeat of the resistance, but it gave momentum to the Kabul government, and it made look the freedom fighters inexperienced, to say the least. And from then on, it was downward. So even though in about 2 years, the freedom fighters took over Kabul, but they had lost their credibility. And the whole thing was that nobody was going to listen to them in Central Asia, that here is this victorious army that has defeated the Soviet Union. That no, that these were people who were fighting 2-3 years to hardly have enough strength to take over the government. So again, this was, it may appear like conspiracy theory, but a lot of the facts kind of support that argument that because subsequently the Americans abandoned Afghanistan altogether. The Soviet Union fell, the Berlin Wall came down, and Americans were more interested in how, to celebrate the freedom of the Czechs and the Poles and the Hungarians and everyone else. Those Afghans, who cares about them? And it was the Afghans who paid a price of close to 2 million lives and close to 14,000 villages that were destroyed. And so the Afghans paid the price, the Europeans reaped the benefit, and the Americans said, like, what Afghans? Oh, were we supposed to be allies? Were we supposed to be supporting each other, helping one another? No, not at all. So when the Mujahideen took over the government, it turned into a real civil war. There is a lot of domestic political dynamics involved here that I'm going to skip. But that civil war turned Kabul into Dresden. Pretty much the entire city was destroyed. More than 70,000 people died because the prime minister appointed was fighting with the minister of defense, who were each on top of one hill and one mountain and shooting at one another. And so the city of Kabul was destroyed. Afghanistan turned into 7 fiefdoms, governments in this and that province. They just pretty much declare themselves independent, de facto independence. The central government didn't have much authority over them. And there were a lot of atrocities committed by the government forces as well. And it was in this kind of environment in 1995 when the Taliban appeared. And the Taliban appeared as the saviors because the freedom fighters, the Mujahideens, the infighting, the factionalism, and all of that had turned the country into a state of chaos. But it was more important that while this was happening, Afghanistan was not on anyone's radar. The Americans, the Europeans, they didn't care. They were just so happy that Eastern Europe was liberated. Who helped it get liberated, that didn't matter. So when Taliban came to Afghanistan at that time, people welcomed them, not because they loved their extremist ideology, but because they made it a rule. They gave a warning to all the warlords, telling them, either you put down your weapons and we will embrace you, or we're going to come after you and kill you. And they said, there is no compromise. We are not negotiating. And they were so effective that they unified the country more than the previous established government could. So the fiefdoms were gone. The warlords were kicked out. Some went to Turkey, some went to Uzbekistan, some went to Iran. They pretty much disappeared. So Taliban pretty much unified the whole country, which is, I think, that is to their credit. But in the meantime, their ideology was so extreme, fanatic, you could say that, of the Dark Ages, yes, misogynistic, yes. You can put any label on them, is that they use the excuse like, oh, we don't have enough people to form a police force. And since there is we can't guarantee your security, then the women should stay in their homes. So employment, gone. For the same reason, schools were closed for girls. Probably many of them were closed for men, for boys anyways. So this obsession with restricting women's freedoms is what brought them to the world's attention. That here are people who are acting as if they lived in the 9th or 10th century and were totally indifferent to the 20th century, to modern demands and expectations of the people. So it was this contrast that, as far as the national politics is concerned, they did a wonderful thing by uniting the country, the state, and getting rid of the warlords, getting rid of all the civil wars. So that was all positive. And on the negative side, they trampled on people's civil liberties left and right without regard for anything. And because people wanted safety, security, they accepted it, thinking that it will be temporary. Then comes 9/11, and it's important to note that bin Laden was a populist Islamist in the Sudan. He was, a rich Saudi who had all the money to open schools, hospitals, build roads, and all these things. And his popularity created a little bit of a problem. Created a problem for the Saudis. It created a problem for the West. So finally, they said, okay, we better get rid of him, separate him from the people he serves, because that's where he was building his power base. And as he was supposed to be flown to Saudi Arabia, the Saudi royal family said, we don't want him. We just took away his citizenship. Well, so the plane had to keep flying from Sudan. Instead of stopping in Saudi Arabia, they dropped the man in Afghanistan. And so there, because he had already worked during the Soviet invasion, he had friends. So basically, the Americans dumped him on the Afghans. So when 9/11 happened, the Americans said, give us bin Laden. And the Afghans said, do we have a treaty of extradition? No. Are we recognizing each other's country? No. Then on what basis are you asking? And they say, well, we have certain Afghan hospitality code. We can hand him to you, but we will meet you halfway. We are going to hand bin Laden to a third country, and there you can file a case against him, whatever, you take care of things there. So they suggested that they will hand over bin Laden to Algeria, so that the Afghan hospitality norms will be honored, and that the United States could file a case against him, take him to the international court, whatever. This sounded too good. And so the American says, well, you either give him over or we are coming. And at that time, I was very active starting September 14th. I was in the media, on the radio, on TV, everywhere. And here was my argument. I said, the Taliban had done a great thing by unifying the country, which is something neither the Americans could do, nor the Russians had any interest or anything. So why don't we negotiate with the Taliban, with the moderate Taliban, and you will have a good partner there with a stable country, no more warlords, and the civil war and all that is taken care of. And the more I emphasize this, the Bush administration portrayed me as a Taliban supporter. And my argument was that what you can achieve through peace, you will not achieve through war, especially with the Taliban. But of course, I was nobody and I was ignored. And what I suggested that they talk to the Taliban in 2001, they talked to the Taliban in 2020. But the next thing is that once we went there, I was part of a peace process. We had two Afghan movements during the quote unquote, during the reign of the Taliban. One was called the Cyprus Conference. I was a member of that one. The other one was called the Rome Conference. And so we had our own Greco-Roman drama going on there. And our effort was just to bring these warring parties together peacefully. But of course, that was not to be. And so because of the opposition to the US invasion of Afghanistan, I became a kind of persona non grata and marginalized from any other subsequent negotiations or participation in the government or anything like that. Not that I wanted it, but I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to be any part of it anyways because of my own principles. And so the new government that was formed was had several problems. One of the problems was that they allowed for every political faction to come to the parliament in Afghanistan. The communists that killed thousands of educated Afghans, no problem, like they were forgiven, come join the government. The left, the right, the center, every shade, except for the Taliban. So in a way, the Americans defined for the Afghans who their enemy ought to be. And so in 2004, the Taliban said, look, we want to make peace. We want to come. We want to join the government. And the Americans give the signal, no, they are not allowed. So they went back and they became stronger. They had more recruits. They found weapons, and it went on. In 2009, they tried one more time. Again, certain extremist politicians in the Afghan government said, oh no, you are considering them your brothers. They were ridiculing President Karzai, who said, well, they are our own Afghans, they are our own brothers. They were ridiculing them, so they're rejecting them a second time. A few other times that the Taliban tried to play the game and do it peacefully. At one point, the man who's now become the president, the Taliban president of Afghanistan, who happens to have the same name as the other president, both of them are named Ghani. Pakistanis put him in prison for 8 or 9 years. Crime? Because he wanted peace, and Pakistan didn't want that. One of the leaders of the Taliban, again, who was considering a peaceful rapprochement with the Kabul government, mysteriously he was bombed, and we can guess by whom. Americans, of course. So when we closed all the doors on the face of the Taliban and wouldn't accept them, then the only thing is that they had to go through war. Now, the next thing was that the American government created an Afghan government that was corrupt, from top to bottom. And this got to a point where many of the government officials, especially the high-ranking ones, and I have written a paper on this, I think it's in the Huffington Post, they were on the CIA payroll. They would be getting an additional salary in American dollars in the name of hospitality expenses, which was basically bribing them. And when they were getting that kind of money, where the average income of the average Afghan could be barely a few dollars, and here you have these officials who are getting multimillionaires. So now, before the Taliban come this second time, with some exaggeration, they say like a quarter of the city of Mazar-e-Sharif were all real estate that were owned by the governor. What kind of governor? Who could be fired by the president, but no one could move them away. So he became the governor for life, basically, because the central government had no power. And that is because these were those same warlords that the Americans used in their invasion, just like the Russians did. The Americans invaded from the north, just like the Russians, brought these runaway warlords, brought them back and give them all the power to take over the government. And they did. And they kicked the Taliban out. And now we had this vendetta between the two factions. Let me close this with the last betrayal. And the last betrayal goes back to 2020, last year. Now, we were supposed to be, when Americans were ready to make peace, we were supposed to make peace, but with whom? In the last 2 or 3 years, the American casualties were either 1 or 2. In other words, the Taliban could not attack the Americans because they were in their bases. The country militarily was operated by the Afghan army. So there were no American casualties. So there was de facto peace between the American and the Taliban. But there was no peace between the Taliban and the Afghan government. There was no peace between the Taliban and the citizens of Afghanistan. There was no peace between the Taliban and the roads and the bridges and everything they could blow and destroy, burn schools and all that. Now, if you want to make peace, you're supposed to make peace where there is war. And that peace was not made. The mistake was the Americans said to the Taliban, let's make peace. There was already, as I said, a de facto peace because nothing was happening between these two parties. But the Americans undermined and bypassed the very government that they had established in Kabul. The Americans said, no, you guys, you stay where you are. We are going to make peace with the Taliban. What do you think that made of the Taliban? It gave them so much significance, like they were the real parties. So the Taliban says, okay, we can make peace with the Americans, but we are not going to make peace with this American-installed government in Kabul. Not at all. They are not worth anything. So this was the big mistake we made. We did not make peace. We did not make peace between the warring parties. We made peace between parties that were not fighting. And so the next thing was President Ghani, Ashraf Ghani of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, the one that was overthrown. He was a very smart, very well-educated, intelligent man, professor at Johns Hopkins, working with the World Bank. He had all the credentials. And he was also, in some ways, uncompromising. And this may have contributed to his downfall. So when the United States, when the Trump administration made peace with the Taliban and then invited President Ghani, say, oh, why don't we come to Camp David? We will sign this. And by the way, Trump was a student of President Ghani at some Johns Hopkins economic class or some such thing. Anyways, and President Ghani says, wait a minute. you didn't invite me to make peace with them. We didn't negotiate the terms. You just want to use me because you have made peace. So I'm not going to come. And Trump made an announcement, oh, that there was some firing at some American forces, so we canceled the talks. That was a lie. The thing is that President Ghani didn't want to come to it. And so the Americans took that personal. They did not support him from that point on. And that was a great risk. And that all resulted in what happened 2 weeks ago, that with the blitzkrieg in its real sense, the Taliban, who were supported by Pakistan in terms of logistics and military, as well as by Iran, who provided some drones and things for them, took over the country in pretty much no time. And I must add just one more point, is the reason for Pakistan is since its inception. Remember that India-Pakistan dynamics there? That Pakistan does not want any nationalistic government in Afghanistan. It has to be religious, because then it can use it against the quote-unquote Hindu India. Because otherwise, Afghanistan, if Afghanistan has close ties with India, Pakistan gets sandwiched in the middle. And it doesn't want that. So that's why Pakistani's interference in the Afghan affair is very, very open. That after the Taliban took over on the 16, 17, whatever, the Taliban flags were hoisted in Islamabad within hours. And that's how daring and how open and how shameless they are. And the world community didn't do anything, even if I have to raise my hand to, come on, light. So I think that's how we all betrayed Afghanistan in many ways, especially the West, because they really didn't do anything for that. So here we go. So let me stop here. I hope most of you are still awake. And if you are, then I will entertain questions if you have any. I'm sure I confused you enough that some points may need clarification. So
Thank you for that very lucid history of what's happened in Afghanistan in the last century. Incredibly valuable. And you spoke a lot about betrayal and mistakes. I had a conversation with a friend of mine from college who served in Afghanistan. And I called him, I sent him a text message. I was like, hey man, how are you doing? And he said he's doing terrible, that he had kind of wept all night, that he had been talking with a lot of his friends. He felt betrayed. And he felt betrayed because he thought he was there for moral reasons. He thought he was there for Afghanistan. He thought he was there for the women. That's what he was sold. And that's what his brothers and sisters in arms were sold. And when this happened, one of the things that I think really shook him was that it made him question if the reason why he was told he was there was really the reason he was there. So my first kind of thought and question for you is, when you speak about betrayal and mistakes, I wonder if, that is even maybe too generous, because to betray means that there was originally a plan and then you turned, or a mistake means you wanted to do something and you messed up. But when you were talking about how the US used Afghanistan in its larger conflict with the Soviets, that to me rings more true. And I wonder if what's just happened in Afghanistan is more about attacking the CCP, which we've decided is our bigger enemy than terror, than it is about, betraying the Afghans. Is it a ruthless play on an even larger geopolitical global in a conflict? And we could go on and on about the implications to China. Maybe we should come back to the China thing, because that takes us into a whole other, direction. But that's the first thing that I think about when you talk about, these betrayals and these mistakes is I question the integrity of my own country and its intention to have ever not been betraying, to have ever not, made the mistakes. If it was ever not just their own, our own selfish motivations to be there in the first place, whether it's for opium or to defeat the Soviets or defeat the CCP. I think that before we open into a full conversation, you see that Elizabeth has joined us. And I do really want to hear your thoughts about this, Zaman, and I hope that I really do want to hear your thoughts about it. And I know Elizabeth's only able to be with us for 15 minutes. She shared this beautiful rug. So I wonder if Elizabeth, can you introduce this rug and kind of add it to our overall material that we'll reflect on in a moment?
Hi, everybody. Elizabeth Stewart here. And the rugs are a glimpse into the artist's hands and eyes and life. And Will's got, I think, an image of a particular rug that I want to share with you, which is really salient, but it's a glimpse into the life of the artist in one of the world's most artistic cultures. In fact, this culture pretty much, in my opinion, invented abstract art in the way that the rugs were produced over decades and decades and decades. But it's a glimpse into a culture of an artistic and creative sensitivity and sensibility in the besiege of war. And the response is an artistic one, and it's an in-your-face one. And it's, I think, a beautiful expression of what Doctor is saying to us. Okay, so in this rug, you're going to see the traditional borders, and these borders have been done in various centers of rug production. You know, I mentioned Turkoman, Baluchi. These are Western Afghanistan. These are wonderful areas for rug production. This is thousands of years old, these motifs that you see in all of the borders. And, you know, you can count all the borders. That sort of is the significance. It's centering the image into its importance. So the more borders you have in these styles of rugs from Afghanistan, the more interest you put into the center. And if you notice, this rug was done in the early 1980s. And it marked an artistic shift because the rugs in Afghanistan up to this point were in the Persian style. So, you know, when you see a Persian rug, you know, there's various motifs and they're always abstract motifs. But all of a sudden in the 1980s, what we get is this incredible outpouring of these styles of rugs. So this is the style with helicopters and weaponry and tanks. But it makes me cry is because, of course, it's a recurring theme in the artistic sensitivity and the artistic culture. And the way artists create is to reflect on the current times that they're living in. But to say that this style of rug making and the borders that are so very traditional, so very, very traditional, is slapped in your face with this, I don't know, this imagery of war. And what you have to realize, guys, is that this tradition goes back thousands and thousands of years. So these rugs were used, you know, in homes, they were used in tents, they were used by various families through the generations. A family would pass down a particular motif. And that was the classic way that the rugs were done until right around the 1980s when we see this change. They're called in professional circles for collectors of such things, they're called war rugs. It's you know, it's a kind of a takeoff from the traditional Afghani shield and crest rug, where it's sort of meant to show you, I'm from this family, etc. But all of a sudden we get this different art form. I mean, amazing art form. This tribal weaving is the glory and treasure of Central Asia. The rugs are sort of messengers of one family's artistic sensitivity and artistic identity. We would not have our Western style of abstract art without the Afghani rug.
I'm looking at my brothers and sisters' faces, grim and painful and not knowing anywhere. And she said, I look out the window and the whole city seems to be abandoned because nobody leaves their home for security. She said, the only thing I wish is I wish I had a flying carpet.
How beautiful. Well, that's the origination of that myth as well, by the way, comes from Afghanistan. And that's the reason these carpets are such a focal point in, you know, we tend to think of our art as being, you know, two-dimensional on a wall. This is a whole different aesthetic, goes back so many, I mean, the classic Afghani rug goes back to prehistory. So, you know, we don't know where these designs and motifs come from. But the interesting thing about the 1980s is that the complete sea change in the way that artists conceived what a rug should be.
And this is our running message, is how can you use your art? How can you tell stories that bring awareness and make a change? And so, you know, I think that a lot of people in this audience are probably screenwriters, mythologists, different types of storytellers. And so it's really rich and valuable for all of this community to kind of see how this premier art of this culture has transformed to meet the narrative of the moment and to try and move the narrative. And I hope they do move the narrative. And I'm really grateful that you were able to share these with us.
Along what you're saying, Will, what's fascinating about what you just said is that the artists who've created these rugs for thousands of years, at the basis of any conception of any rug is a narration. So it's a narrative tool, you know, and the two things that go hand in hand with that rug making are poetry and the weaving craft. And so when you talk about the narrative that's embedded in these rugs, you know, it's very difficult. Scholars and curators of Afghani textiles spend lifetimes trying to understand the messages and the narration in the rugs.
When a culture is being really oppressed, this is the psychologically, when you're suppressing something inside yourself, you're setting up a sort of shadow resistance. And that often can take form in the art. I'm wondering, Connie, if you've had any kind of reaction to watching and listening to Zaman and listening to Elizabeth in the context of, you know, the response of the shadow and maybe even the response of art.
I'm really choked up. I'm so glad to learn this history, Zaman. It's so missing in our world about your country. And those images from the 60s and 70s, just, I feel so much grief. So, but you know what I also feel is my connection to Rumi and the Sufis. And Afghanistan is his homeland, as you well know. And I'm wondering what the Taliban's relationship to the Sufis there will be. Do you have any insight into that?
I think most of what we see or say is of the Taliban of the 90s, 1996 to 2001. And those images of restrictions and suppression and all that were so, etched so deeply in the psyche of the people that the word Taliban is synonymous with that. So they are now claiming that they are different. They are now claiming that they are kind of a Taliban 2.0, if I can throw that in there. It's just that most of us find it difficult to trust them, to believe them, to take their word for what they say. We just hope that they have changed. And the thing is that within their, I mean, it's such a big organization, and so you can't even control everyone if you have an established government. So imagine if you have all these warriors in this province and that province, you know, trigger happy. Some of them, others might be a little more sensible. So by the time they get control of their own, we don't know how they're going to control the country. One thing we know for sure is that the first time they came around, like I said earlier, they came to a ruined country and people wanted stability and they provided it. This time they have not come to a ruined country. Kabul is a city of 5 million people. It's a very, very different place, and so are the other cities. There has been so much development, so much progress. And so Taliban are just not capable. They are just not capable of kind of operating a government like that, if I can use that word there. They just don't have the power. So that's why they are, from the start, they are negotiating to have other partners in the government. Now, who they are going to choose as partners, that might be a question. Whether the orientation or in that kind of a combination of Taliban plus government, whether the voices of moderation be heard or not, whether they could really show to people that they are really that they have become more moderate and more receptive and more understanding. So just to recap it, like, because the images of the 1990s are so much defining them, they might have changed, but it's difficult to forget what they were. And so let's hope that what they have become, if they've changed at all, let's hope that that's different.
So, you know, I find in myself, it's hard to trust that. And I think part of it in response to Will is about the shadow projection. So just the word Taliban elicits our shadow projection. Like in another generation, communists did the same thing. And so I think that the images of the religious fanaticism and the beheadings and all the stuff that we've seen in our generation, I know that there are people now who don't have that memory. So they're not carrying the same shadow projection, right, that we are. But I'm wondering, one of the questions that came up for me was, how do we see the humanity in people who are the target of so much projection? How do we see them, first of all, as individuals, not this kind of collective mass, oh, the Taliban. It's like saying, you know, the Jews, the Christians, the communists, the whatever. These are individuals. Some of them more violent than others, some of them more fundamentalist than others. Is it our task to humanize that term and that group? I don't know. Like you say, we'll have to see. I think the fear for women and girls is really intense. It's very intense for me. I know that Hillary Clinton's been working to get women out of there, and I've seen no press about it at all. So yeah, the shadow is always, you know, a part of the dynamic of enemy making, of cultural change, of the individual in relation to the collective, all of that.
I agree with you.
One thing I would like to talk about, and let's make sure that I get this correct, Zaman. I believe in 2018, the Trump administration took the new president or the new head of Afghanistan out of a Pakistani prison. They let him out, and he is now heading Afghanistan. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, if you're talking about the Taliban, Ghani is the new president, and Ghani was the old president, and that's why I'm saying that we probably didn't change much. Anyways, yeah, like I was saying earlier, that anyone among the Taliban who opted for peace, they were either detained by the Pakistanis and put in jail, or they were exterminated, quote unquote, by the Americans because we didn't want them to. And so we wanted to portray them as these warrior fanatics and all that. And one thing, I don't know, we have to be careful about the word extremist or fanatic, is that what they believe is, like, you take a group of people and for 20 years you keep them away from cities, from towns, from colleges, from universities, from civilization, from hospitals, from normalcy, so to say, then they get used to a kind of a lifestyle, you know, not just in terms of being urban versus rural, but also in hiding, you know, and all that. And so certain values, like the codes they have for, you know, how should men behave and how should women behave, and they should be segregated, there should be modesty. That's how they define religion. And so for them, for some of them perhaps at least, that if a woman is not dressed properly, that is, she is somehow contributing to whatever problem may come afterwards. So in order to prevent certain things, that this may sound like US in the 1960s, is that the victims are held responsible for certain crimes. So in order to make sure that, say, a woman is not attacked, then the woman is responsible to dress. And how should they dress? The only things they know, the only code they know, the traditional society of Afghanistan, north, south, east, west, they all are, most of Afghanistan is a rural country. And those values, and that was probably one of the reasons that they went to the countryside first, where they were, you know, if not welcomed, at least accepted, and then they closed in on the capital. But one thing I wanted to mention was that among all those betrayals and blunders, one of the major ones is this evacuation thing, regardless of what President Biden said today. Here was the thing. If they made a deal with them, even if that peace accord was signed with the Taliban, the thing would have been, we had plenty of troops. All of the Bagram base was there. They could have been kept there.
Why did we evacuate the troops before the people?
And how do you evacuate them? The American troops left Bagram base in the middle of the night. They didn't even discuss or notify the government in Kabul.
Well, Zaman, apparently we were asked by Ghani way before he left not to do certain things so that it wouldn't look as if the government was going to fall.
No,
And so some of what we did was because we were trying to prop up his government, and then he split.
no, but the point I'm making is this. Americans left in the middle of the night. Only some villagers who came around says, wait a minute, here there was supposed to be the American base. There is nobody guarding it. There is no, the gates are open, all that. So people went inside to loot it. That's how people found out that the American had already gone. So we took all those troops out. And then on top of that, as most military specialist experts say, you never give a deadline to the enemy. They not only told them when Americans were going to leave, they even give them the numbers, that there were going to be only 400 or 600 troops in the embassy compound. In other words, it's all free, just come over, you know, take over. So in a way, we invited them. And when this chaos created, and all these people who were working with the Americans as translators and whatever, this was supposed to be done 6-7 months ago. And because of the Trump administration of cutting personnel at the immigration, tens of thousands of people were kept waiting and nothing was happening. And then when the Taliban take over, he said, oh, wait a minute, where did these people come from? And what is happening now, the last mistake that President Biden made today was insisting we are going to leave on August 31st. What does that mean? That the people who are desperate to get out, they have to run to the airport because the deadline is August 31st. So we are deliberately creating these huge crowds of people who are running to the airport. If they would say, look, that was our deadline, but we will accommodate, then some people will hold back, but not so, because that makes sense. So what do? We tell them, okay, you guys have got only 3 days. And so if you tell them 3 days and you have 150,000 people, what do you expect them to do? So we are causing the crowds, we are causing the chaos, we are jeopardizing the lives of Afghans as well as Americans. I mean, this is utterly, utterly nonsensical, is that everything we do, we are contributing to that chaos at the airport by telling people, hurry up, like if there is a Woodstock concert and the tickets are going to go out, and if you don't come in the next 1 or 2 days, and of course you don't have the people to process that. And then like the immigration office sends electronic visas to people who are supposed to qualify, right? These visas are blank. And people in Kabul, within hours, printed tens of thousands of those, and they're selling them in the black market. It says, look, here I have a visa. It's a blank, because all visas are blank. So like, when you look at every department, the State Department, the Pentagon, the White House, like if they're competing how to do the most stupid thing, and the chaos that happened today, it was only to be expected.
Okay,
we're waiting for this to happen.
that's exactly where I'd like us to go for a second, because it could be a bureaucratic blunder where politicians are making military decisions, and that's a stupid situation. But we got to at least entertain the question, the thought experiment of what benefit would the United States be getting by enabling, encouraging, facilitating, supporting this chaos, and what benefit might be coming from it going this way. And if there had been a negotiated government, which is what everybody says the US messed up, instead of using their leverage, negotiated government, a balance, if that had happened, then some other things wouldn't have happened. So what you said with the Soviets, first the Soviets invested so much that they were invested. That drew them in to eventually try to take over the governance. Well, in 2012, instead of so NATO goes in and provides security for Afghanistan. But in 2012, Afghanistan gives all the mineral rights to Chinese companies. And the NATO governments, like NATO countries, are like, what the hell? We're the ones paying for all the security, and you're going to let the Chinese reap all the spoils? This doesn't seem right. But what I see is China getting sucked in economically to Afghanistan. And the United States has been trying to get China to participate in the security of Afghanistan to no avail, and they've refused. And now all of a sudden the US has just gone, screw it, we're out. And now China is reallocating resources to the front of Afghanistan. Pakistan is reallocating resources to the front with Afghanistan. Iran is reallocating resources towards the front of Afghanistan. Russia's reallocating resources. And what they're doing, they're moving resources away from the fronts we care more about on this larger geopolitical struggle for the Indo-Pacific and for the Arctic. And so what I see is a ruthless maneuver and an attack in the larger geopolitical battle with the CCP at the expense of the people in Afghanistan, which looks to me like a repetition of the history that we did with the Soviets, where it was Afghanis were used as cannon fodder in the war against the Soviets, and it was sold to them that we were helping them, and we sold again that we were helping them. And instead, when it wasn't in our advantage, and when it was a greater advantage to let them turn into chaos. And what's the other benefit of that? If you look at what the US and the UK have been doing and what they're committed to, it's the quote, Indo-Pacific. You're going to hear it more and more. If you've been paying attention, you've started to hear it a lot. The way that what the Indo-Pacific is really all about is a trade route. The trade route is based on international waters. So when you travel through international waters, through the Suez Canal is where is the choke point of that trade route. When you travel in international waters, there are no taxes. And the US Navy and the UK Navy can dominate and control the international waters, the international shipping lanes with no tariffs, no taxes, Nothing like that. But China would like to build the Belt and Road, and they would like to build it through Afghanistan. They are actively building it through all these Central Asian countries. Well, the UK does not want trade to go through the land bridges, even though Hillary said she wanted to support the Belt and Road coming through Afghanistan. I don't buy it. I think that the UK and the US are pretty invested in the tax-free, tariff-free, international waters, Suez Canal-based Indo-Pacific trade route. They're putting all their resources in defending this trade route. And so this pulls resources away from that trade route, from their competitors, and it creates chaos. And what would have otherwise been a land road for China to build out their connection between Asia and Europe, which the US cannot allow from their point of view. They don't want trade going from Asia to Europe. They want trade going from Asia to the West Coast and from Europe to the East Coast. And if it's gonna go from Asia to Europe, it better go through the international waters and through the Suez Canal, not through Chinese-controlled, Afghani tariffed roads. So maybe I'm gone too far, but when I just take a step back, I see a really ruthless strategy to benefit. And I wonder if any of this resonates or rings true to you, Zaman.
I think when you look at the long history of Afghanistan, Afghanistan was the hub of activities when there was the Silk Roads and the trade between the East and the West and all of that. India and they all went through Afghanistan, and then came that guy, Columbus. So when the trade routes switched from land to the sea, Afghanistan became irrelevant. Its economy and everything. On top of that, of course, we had some help from Genghis Khan and others who came and destroyed whatever was left. But the point is, it was that shift. So what the Chinese are doing now, I don't think I'm not sure if they are really trying to reverse that trend of the post-Columbian period, but that is that they want to create a kind of what they call the road network, and the fight is over Central Asia, and the Russians have been kind of subjugating their Central Asian Muslims, and the Chinese have been doing their share of it. So what these big power means basically to the Muslims is that that's how these Islamist ideologies resonate with most people, is that these foreign superpowers, these foreign powers are only interested in subjugating us. And I saw a picture of Putin and the Chinese and the Indian prime ministers kind of holding hands together and kind of cheering and very happy. Whatever the occasion was, that's a different thing. But an Afghan wrote a comment underneath saying, next, the graveyard of the empires. So who's going to be next? So some people say, well, maybe China is going to try to come to invade Afghanistan, and then we'll probably have to deal with those.
Or they partner with the Taliban, completely undermining their internal domestic narrative, where they're critical of the Muslims, critical of religion, and what are they doing with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang? This is going to exacerbate the problem that the Chinese have, or the CCP more specifically, is having with the Uyghurs. You mentioned the Mujahideen. Well, the CIA recruited the Uyghurs to join the Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviets. And so, one of the things that seems to maybe be the case is an interest in supporting a freedom movement for the Uyghurs. Because if we can get the other Stani countries, the Central Asian countries, to not trust the Chinese over Xinjiang and stop looking, turning a blind eye from how they're the genocidal, cotton-picking enslavement of the Uyghurs. I think that we're gonna start hearing a lot more about the Uyghurs, in part because of this, and it's gonna be a real problem for China to do deals with the Taliban, and for the Taliban to do deals with China. It's going to make them all look bad. And now Iran, which has always fought with the Taliban, is going to do a deal with them anyway because they're supporting China. I think this is just going to create a giant diplomatic mess for China, the CCP's effort to create a bunch of alliances in Central Asia.
I think there is the rising China element that is important. And because most countries realize that China is going to be the next superpower. So they're playing the Chinese game already. The Saudi prince goes to Beijing and approves of Chinese policy towards the Uyghurs, who are also called the Uyghurs. The correct pronunciation is Uyghur, which is the original root for the word yogurt. So the Pakistani Prime Minister, who is so gung-ho on Afghanistan when it comes to the Uyghurs, he just in a couple of interviews I saw him. It's just like the power went off and like he was unplugged. Doesn't criticize China one bit. Now we come to our next door neighbors, the Iranians. What choice do they have? If the Americans are planning every day to see, you know, we're going to do something to the Iranians and all that, so they have to, they're pushed to the lap of the Chinese. So it might be the Islamic Republic of Iran, but when it comes to the Uyghurs, nothing. And so it's in this context where everyone is approving of China's policy towards the Uyghurs, and the poor Uyghurians are, suffering. I don't know if that's that simple word can describe the miseries and the separation they are going through. So I think this is the shameful reality of us in the 21st century, when we call the world civilized, but most of what we do is not necessarily civilized. It's the political dimension that we prefer to address force first and more than the humanitarian aspect of it.
That's exactly why I think my friend felt so betrayed, who served. He said that he believed he killed people. He missed his own child's birth. His own friends died, and he thought that it was all for human rights. And now he feels like it was just part of a power struggle, a giant power struggle. Vorris, I see you might have something to add to that.
Yes. First, Zaman, I really want to thank you for, here I'm following in Connie Zweig, the photographs and video you showed from the 1960s and 70s. And this is going to lead to my question. And the reason why I'm so impressed with that and so thankful for it, because it reminds me what Gloria Anzaldúa, the Chicana cultural feminist and queer theorist, argued. And she argued that nothing happens in the real world unless it happens in our heads. And your discussion today and the photos you shared have changed what was in my head. So, for example, your simple photos deconstructed the whole notion of Samuel Huntington and the notion of the clash of civilizations. What's really going on is a clash of empires, right? Or the notion of the end of history by Francis Fukuyama. These two texts drive so much what we do, and it's not the end of history. So what I want to ask you in terms of what's in my head now is, how do the everyday Afghanis view the Afghans who worked with the US government? Or let me ask it another way. Can you explain for me how that operates, and then how everyday Afghanis may see it?
It's such a different reality. There is the COVID. There is the drought. There is this political chaos. And I was talking to one of my relatives who sent me a picture. I said, well, how come nobody's wearing a mask? And they said, that's the last thing we worry about. She said, when I leave home, I'm not sure whether I'm going to come back alive to see my children. So Corona, no problem. That is the least of my worries. And so when these miseries pile up, people get so used to it that they are they get a kind of, I don't know if we can call it an immunity, but at least we could say that it's a kind of indifference that they sometimes you see them in gatherings and parties. I mean, not our kind of parties, but you know, weddings, other ceremonies, and you will say like, wait a minute, do they live on a different planet? That there are no precautions, no masks, no nothing, and they say, yeah, we know, but the point is that that is not the uncertainty that is in our lives. That our lives are threatened by things we can't predict. And one friend told me, I said, look, the Taliban are saying that, you know, there's going to be order and they're going to be help. They say, yeah, keep talking. And say that I was looking down the window. There is a house that belonged to a high-ranking military commander who happened to have a big car. And they broke into his house and they took his car, and they say, well, you know, they were looking for him because they wanted to pretty much deal with him right there. And the man ran away for his life. So there are burglaries, and people don't know who is doing it because in a state of chaos, some may attribute it to the Taliban, but there might be many other people who take advantage of these. So there are way too many uncertainties in their lives. I talked to my sister, and she said, well, her 3 sons have gone to the airport 3-4 days ago, and they haven't come back because they don't want to lose their place in line. So for 3-4 days, they are sleeping there, they are eating there, they are, you know, lying down here on the sidewalk in the dirt, whatever. But this is the kind of situation that the problems that they put up with. That we get upset when there are 2 people ahead of us in a supermarket, you know, when we want to check out food. But there are literally tens of thousands of people. And so if they have gotten that place early in line, and then they go and they make it through the Taliban checkpoint, and they get to the American checkpoint, and the guy says, where is your passport? They expect them to have US passports to go through, like, oh, wait a minute, I don't have a US passport, I am an Afghan, but I helped the Americans. I worked in this project. I worked in this school that the Americans were involved in. And so their involvement in the slightest becomes a huge liability with the Taliban. And yet with the Americans, they either ask for a green card or a passport. And they say, well, if I had a green card or a passport, I wouldn't even be here. And the argument the Taliban are making is that, oh yeah, if you let anyone, if you allow anyone to go to the United States, whether we are here or not, they will, and you know, people will jump to the opportunity. And my argument with them was that, yeah, look at it this way. Why would these many people, it's okay that so many people are attracted to go to the United States, but why would so many people be running away from, quote unquote, an Islamic government when they themselves consider themselves Muslims? So if Muslims are running away from an Islamic government, one of them must not be Islamic. Which one? I don't know.
Thank you, Zaman. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Zaman, before I wrap it up, I would like to address one issue that I have been seeing in the New York Times, and not so much on CNN, but at least in the print media. This is a billion-dollar plus operation, apparently not only well-funded by almost 20% donations, but there's a whole lot of credibility behind it that we really don't see in the same sort of way. We treat them like they're, you know, not a credible force in the environment that they're in. That said, there's a huge opium trade in Afghanistan that is legitimized throughout much of the drug trade throughout the world. And it may be scandalized by the American point of view or the Western world's point of view, but in a large part of the world, this is generating a huge gross national product for Afghanistan. And for people who are set up to operate them as farms, it's a crop. In just a line or two, can you say something about the opium trade in Afghanistan? And then I do want to come back and I do want to take us out. But I thought I would work that into the dialogue because we often only talk about issues that sort of resonate soft and warm and fuzzy with us, and not the ones that seem to be have more conflict and that we don't agree with.
I'll give you a 20-year-old answer. When the Taliban were approached by Americans the last time, it says, like, I mean, why are you so involved? You consider yourselves a Muslim and all that. You're involved with all this, you know, drug trade, narcotics and all that. And they said, look, you Americans are producing something that comes and kills our people, weapons. So we are producing something that might be killing your people. So what's the problem? If you promise to stop your exports, we will stop our exports. And they agreed, and the Americans said, okay, we are going to give you $30 million, which was something that was in the news at the time. So Mullah Omar went and gave a decree and said, the cultivation of opium is completely forbidden in Islam. So within a week, they either burned or destroyed all the cultivation. Gone, no more. But here's the problem. When the Americans took over, farmers went back to it in no time. And the Americans didn't take advantage of having crop alteration or, you know, having something else to be planted and all that. Anyway, so I think drugs are the source of income for most of the insurgent groups around the world. So now that they have taken over, probably that they have taken over all the checkpoints on every border in Afghanistan. And so they have incomes from there. But then the Western world has blocked all their the assets of the government of Afghanistan, millions of dollars that were supposed to go from the United States, from the European community and all that. So all of that has stopped. So we'll see how they negotiate that out and how it's going to work out.
Well, you certainly have provided us with an unscheduled Myth Salon that really, I felt it was really electric. And I really commend you for your courage in coming in here and your eloquence. And I mean it with every sense and fiber of my being. I value our friendship, Zaman. You have, you've been part of my life for more than 20 years. And whenever I appeal to you to come to a class or show something, you're there, you know, and if it's warm and fuzzy like Rumi, or if it's kind of sharp and thorny like this, you're there to talk about it. And I give you high marks for doing that. On a last closing note, I do want us to give reverence to the conflicts and difficulties that are around us today. These are the most complicated times. I have ever experienced in my old life. I mean, you know, I've been around for a long time, and it's been largely pretty cool, pretty fun. This is not fun. I don't enjoy going places and having to confront people who don't really believe in compassion or the collective or what have you. And so I would like us to even welcome those people into our circle, and let's give a moment of silence to those who are being affected by what's happening and those who feel distanced from it and are going to go about their way. I think they have the right to do that. I don't support a lot of the things that they want to do, but I support the whole. And there's a sense of oneness and all of us being together. And we're one organism as a collective species. And so let's have a moment. Thank you, everyone. Peace be with you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.